Hello, my name is Alex from the Advent Label Applicator Company. This is going to be a demonstration operation video for an Advent 205. The Advent 205 is a 200 series labeler, so it's designed to put glue onto a plain paper label and apply it to a round container. This model in particular is the 205, which is generally designed or used with 5-gallon pails. It can be used with regular straight-sided containers like gallons, quarts, pints, but generally it is usually used for 5-gallon pails. In this particular video, we're actually going to focus on running 1-gallon bleach type containers. You can see some in the background here that we've done some testing on. And we're also going to be running straight-sided quarts. For this particular application, the customer will be using 5-gallon pails in the future, but they wanted in particular to focus on operation setup for these straight-sided containers. And the 205 actually does have works quite well with the 1-gallon containers, because generally it has a registration system for the 5-gallon pails to register off the ear. We'll actually be doing that with the 1-gallon container here, and you can see in the background, you can see how we're trying to line it up. It has some various values handwritten on there, where we're trying to get the label to line up on the handle. And the 205's standard registration system allows us to utilize that quite well. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is we're going to be running 2 containers. It's going to be a little bit of a longer video, so I'm going to try to break it up into parts. I might pause here and there. But the first thing I'm going to go ahead and do is just do a review of the machine. Again, the Advent 205 uses hot melt glue, so it has a heater system on it. And it takes about 60 to 90 minutes for it to warm up. So generally some people will actually stick a timer, an outlet timer, and have the machine come on about 90 minutes before the shift starts. And you know the machine's ready to operate when you could turn it on. Here's the start switch, and you can hear it turning nice and freely. This machine has a little bit of a different pitch, because we're not using our standard EVA-based hot melt glue. For this particular application, the customer wants to use a pressure-sensitive glue, which is a little bit more viscous. We have it set for about 320 degrees, but it is going to be a little bit thicker, so it's just a different wine on the machine. But you can see it's turning nice and freely. Okay. So this machine's been on for all day, so you might see a little bit of vapors coming out of the machine, but as long as you toggle it on and off, it will stay nice and clean. Alright, so you have your heater system, your on-off switch. The on-off switch is a 3-position switch. In the middle it's off. In mode number 1, it just feeds the label right away. There's no registration. So when the container hits this trigger, it feeds the label. And that's the mode you would use on the quart containers. In mode number 2, it will not feed the label because it's turning on this registration system. So it needs, as you can see here, it needs to hit the registration switch in order for it to feed a label. And then the timer, there's 2 sets of timers on the front of the machine. One's just a dwell timer, this middle timer, and tells how long these black feed tires to rotate for. And generally, a setting of 5 is going to be perfect for almost any type of label. If you're getting more than 1 label on or a little pre-feed, usually your timer's too high. If you don't get a label up to the spinning container, if it doesn't feed on, it's usually because the timer is set too low. And then this other timer is your registration timer. So when you turn on this registration switch in mode number 2, it allows you to position the container or the label anywhere along the circumference of the container. As you can see here, it's a locking timer, and we have different values. By changing the number on that locking timer, we can position the label anywhere up against, or anywhere in reference to this handle. And the handle is actually what's hitting that registration switch. So that allows you to place the label anywhere along the circumference of a bottle that has a feature, a handle, or on a 5-gallon pail, the handle, the wire bail. All right. We also have a carriage knob here. This allows you to adjust for different diameter containers. It moves these white tires forward and backwards, so you can run anywhere from like a 5-gallon pail all the way to a pint, usually about 3 inches in diameter, is the smallest. We have an overhead pressure arm. This is used for unfilled or light containers. Generally you don't see it on an Advent 205, but because we're running these containers, we need to utilize them. Generally, if you're running a 5-gallon pail, you would lock it in the up position, or some people just remove it. And it's just simply, almost like anything on the Advent machine, just using your Allen wrench tool, which comes with the machine, will allow you to almost remove all the parts on the machine. These are our label feed tires. These are our aluminum collars that support the rear of the container. These are the white tires that support the front. Again, this is our trigger system. This is our product placement guide, which has a thumb lock. You can move left and right to position the label or the container to the label. This is our hopper system, which holds your stack of labels and allows them to be fed through the machine. Again, this is the registration switch. And you can see everything is enclosed with an aluminum cover. And a couple other things I'd like to point out before we start operating is we have this glue tray here. So underneath this black cover, we have a tank of glue that's being melted at about 300 degrees. And as you're using the machine, you need to fill it up with glue. As you can see here, it's a stainless steel pot. So it allows you to check the color of the glue, but you always want it to be about a ½ an inch from the top of the cover. We only received a limited sample of glue, your pressure sensitive glue, so ideally it would be a little bit higher. So one thing you might want to do is you might want to fill it. And generally, ideally, you want to fill it with the smaller pellets of glue. You had bags of glue, so you might have to cut those down to fit that in there. But I'll talk about some of the operation of the machine maintenance as we're running it, but just to get the video going, I'm just going to kind of here reset and just go what would happen when you want to run the machine at the beginning of the day. So first thing, you want to make sure the heater's on. It's been ready. It's been melting the glue for about 90 minutes, turning nice and freely. Then as you come to the machine, first of all, you probably want to check your glue. Again, how much glue you have in the machine. So usually the easiest way is to move this out of the way. That allows you to, and then add any glue that you may need to add to get that glue level up a little bit higher. The pan does have a baffle in it, so you can use the machine as new glue is being melted. All right. Okay. And then before you make your setup adjustments for your container, you want to make sure that the machine is nice and clean. So you could wipe down any of the parts of the machine. Generally, you're going to use your CCC 509A solvent, which comes with the labeler. And again, you're going to take a towel, saturate it, and then you just want to wipe down all your parts. As the glue is melting, there's vapors, there's mineral spirit vapors, and that might make everything a little bit of glue. So you want to make sure that you wipe everything down. And then you have these black label feed tires, and you don't want to use solvent to clean those. Generally, you want to use an alcohol or water, rubbing alcohol, just to blot those tires. They have an open cell foam, so they begin to accumulate dust and grime. So just again, blotting them with an alcohol or water is ideal. All right, so the machine's nice and clean, and from there, what we want to do is start making our adjustments. And I'm going to go ahead and take a container right here. And the first thing I'm going to do is adjust for the diameter. And the idea is you want the containers supported by both sets of rollers and just hovering over the finger bar. The finger bar is this brass bar that deflects the label up to the spinning container. If we switch sides right here, Fred could peek on the side, you can see it's just hovering over that finger bar by about 1/4 of an inch. All right. If it's too close, generally the label will not go on, it will jam. If it's too far away, then the leading edge usually folds over. Now, once we adjusted our diameter, generally we would have, there's 3 or 4 things but we like to do, but what I like to do is to take my stack of labels and put it in the machine. And right now we've already adjusted our guides, and I do like to keep this chipboard underneath there, especially when you have a smaller stack. You could go up to about 1/4 inch usually, but this is smaller, and it just helps insulate it from the heat. Then here, we just go ahead and just drop that in there. Now my guides are a little bit tight, so I'm going to switch here. And you can see our adjustment. It's just wing nuts in the back. And just want to make sure there's a little bit of play there. And you can see it will fall all the way down. We have a nice little step pattern there. So the top label is actually hitting or being grabbed first, as you can see here. Okay. And if you feel like you've messed up, you can always take them out and reset. So again, you want to have it fanned forward a little bit. Just go ahead and drop it down. Okay. If it's a little bit too tight, again, you can open it up a little bit. Just tighten it down. Now the 205, these guides are actually designed to allow you to adjust for an angle, unlike on a tapered 5-gallon pail. So you could actually adjust it. You can make your guides go like that to cant them a couple degrees in or out. Generally on straight-sided containers, you want it to be as straight as possible. And that could be a little tricky. So once you get a setup that's actually pretty good, sometimes people like to put little stickers or witness marks here just to allow them to do changeover very quickly from one label to the other. Again, you want to generally run your labels down the center line of the machine. Then once you have that, you can adjust your container left or right. And this guide right here, which is a thumb lock, allows you to do that. So you can move that in and out. And that allows you to position the container. And then we aren't running a guide on the right side because we have this open frame. You just have to keep your hand up against the product to push it up against this guide. And of course this could be rotated up high, low, I mean whatever your operator prefers. So I usually just put it up right against there, like that. And then the other important adjustment is your rollers, your support rollers. And you can see they all have set screws on them. You can see right there on the front, and then you also have it on the rear. And this is one of the more critical adjustments when you're running smaller containers that have recessed panel areas. Is if you, for instance, if you can see here, you want to avoid having any type of high point interfering with these tires. You want it to be set on the inside. That's what allows that label to go on nice and tight without any type of bubbling or wrinkling. And you want to do what you do to the front, you want to do to the rear too. So ideally, you can see how all the aluminum rollers would be located on the inside of that recessed panel area. And to make those adjustments, the rule of thumb is just to usually bring the label down and then to match the width. And then once you match the width of the label, for instance, if I had that collar right there, that would interfere. So I'm just moving it out to the side just so it clears any of those high points. And it's the same with the white tires too. So you can see I've moved this white tire out of the way, because if it was up, these two white tires were right next like this, it would interfere with the high point of this 1 gallon container. And let me just go ahead and show that. So you can see it would be riding high, it would tilt the container, and that label wouldn't go on very nicely. So by moving it out to the side and clearing that high point, now we get it to rest on the inside. And now the label and the the white rollers and the aluminum collars are flush with the surface of the panel area, the label panel area. So that is probably the single most critical adjustment when you're running these gallon and quart containers. And again, a really good rule of thumb is just to match the width of the label. So we have it all adjusted, and now we're just going to go ahead and put it in mode number 1. And then, as you can see here, I've already fed a label on, but when we insert, it feeds the label right away. And that's because in mode number 1, the registration isn't, the shoulder registration is not being used. It's just triggering off this trigger right here, or feeding off that trigger. So you can see here 2 labels, and it's just going to go on anywhere along the circumference of this 1 gallon container. And what some people do is in mode number 1, to go a little bit faster, what they'll do is they'll just time it by referencing where the handle is when they insert it. And you can see here, just puts that on there. We have 3 labels on there, and they're going on very, very accurately from left to right. It's just they're going anywhere along the circumference of the bottle. And certainly for the quarts, that wouldn't matter. So what we're going to go ahead and do is take a pause here. I'm going to set up my table a little bit better, and then we'll go through running it in mode number 2. Alright, we have a little bit of an issue that was unexpected. We've noticed that, and this comes up occasionally, that the labels, these black labels, are actually sticking to each other. And because we have the separation or the pinch point between this middle feed tire and this sleeve that allows you to adjust for different thickness of labels up actually pretty tight. And it's having a problem separating these labels, and we've discovered that these labels are actually, as you can see here, when you pull, they're sticking to each other. And that's generally because either a UV coating hasn't been cured. And in closer inspection, I can see this black ink, and if you just get the angle of light correct, you can see that it is not, it's matte and glossy, and you can see it's very uneven there. And it looks like whoever applied this UV varnish did not do a very good job, so it's causing problems with these labels separating. And I don't know if this is through a batch, because when we did the testing originally, I did all those 6 containers there, and the labels fed perfectly. And as we got a little bit lower in the stack, you could definitely feel these labels grabbing to each other. So it's a little bit of an issue here, and what we're going to go ahead and do is we're just going to try to go through this video, because it is an operation video, but it might be something that you have to look into with your label printer, because you could definitely again see that this varnish was not applied correctly. Alright, so again, you put the stack in there, and again, this is a very rare problem. It's just a limitation of your labels. Okay, so what was happening is when we were trying to do this demonstration, more than one label was being pulled through, and we discovered the issue. But normally we would just go ahead and put it in mode number 2. This turns on the registration switch, and I have this timer set for 2 right now. what happens is it spins, hits the registration switch, and then puts that label on based on the timer, the locking timer. And what I've tried to do is just to get it set so this part of the label just goes on the center line of this handle. And yeah, it might not be ideal. I think I might want to have the N, or this floor clear, moved over a little bit more. So in this case, what that means is that we need to have the delay a little bit shorter. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and turn it down to 1.8. And then I'm going to go ahead and turn it on. Insert. No, I'm sorry, I went in the wrong direction. So I actually moved it over the wrong direction. So it actually should be 2.2. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is use that same container so you can see the difference. How it will probably move about a ½ inch. Okay. So let's see. It's about 1 inch, as you can see here. And that looks really, really good. So I'm going to go ahead, get a second container. As you can see here. I think that's pretty darn good. Just to show you the repeatability of it, I'm not going to adjust the timer. Should be on usually within a ½ inch. If not, dead on. You can see that's right, dead on. So that's showing how the registration works. And again, I think that's really good. So I'm just going to go ahead and finish this up a little bit more, or finish these. So again, I'm inserting and making sure my hand is up against the top to keep this up against this guide right here. And you might notice that maybe my label is a little bit too high. Maybe I want it a little bit down more. To make that adjustment, we would just move the container up a little bit. So if I move my guide, now if I take that same switch, you should be able to see it move. Okay, so make sure you're in mode number 2. Insert. Make sure you're up against that guide. You can see here, we moved it. And as far as the registration, again, we're within about a ½ inch. So you can see there, fairly straightforward. We'll do our final container right here. And just like that, we've labeled those 1 gallon containers with good registration. Oh, and other things I should point out. So we don't have any glue oozing on the back. Looks really good. And then we have a standard skip glue pattern. And that's automatically adjusted by the machine. And it's completely mechanical, so it's something you don't have to worry about. You got good tack on this rear, the trailing edge, which is usually about a ½ inch. It can vary depending on the thickness of your label paper. And then we got our trailing edge right there. And you can see our glue pattern. That's the leading, and that's the trailing. And of course, we need to label that again. We can do that. Whoops. The glue might be a little sticky. It's a pressure-sensitive glue. I forgot about that. But it still does a fairly good job. It just caught on the glue. If you're going to relabel, you might have to be a little bit aware of that with a pressure-sensitive glue. So we've gone ahead and labeled those 1 gallon containers. Now we're going to switch over to our quarts. And of course our quarts are fairly straightforward. And fortunately, it's fairly easy because the panel area is about the same size. So we don't have to adjust these rollers. So in my case, what I would just do is adjust for the carriage, the diameter. Getting fairly close, and we're just hovering over the brass finger bar. supported by both sets of rollers. And you can see I gave myself about 1/4 of an inch on either side. So if I need to make a fine adjustment, I can certainly do that. And we'll check the rear. The rear's a little bit on the tight side, so I'm just going to scoot it over a little bit more. So I'm a little bit centered on the aluminum rollers. Then I'm going to drop my guide, my product guide. Again, it's just a simple thumb lock. And once we have that done, then we need to adjust our overhead pressure arm. Because you can see right now, if we tried to run it, it would skip. It wouldn't have enough pressure to rotate smoothly. So I'm going to adjust my overhead pressure arm. Again, I'm taking my Allen wrench tool. And then I just loosen up, and then I can move it left and right. Just want to put it in the center line of where the label needs to go. And then I have a stop here. I'm just going to, as I tighten up on the middle, I give myself a little bit of a gap on that stop. And what that allows you to do is to insert the container without having to lift that overhead pressure arm up and down each and every time. So just take it in, drop it in there. Take it out, drop it in. And you can see it's spinning nice and smoothly. And there's no interference with the rear or the front. So things look actually fairly good. Now the only issue is when you do adjust the machine like this, you have to adjust the label to where the container is already located. Okay, so we have our stack of labels. And before, just to double check because of the issue with the 1 gallon containers, I'm just going to check that these labels pull off nice and smoothly. And they do. And probably partially that's because there's less black ink. They do stick a little bit, but shouldn't be much of an issue because we just have less ink coverage. We don't have that big blob of black ink, and this is a gradient, this red. So, but when you do look at an angle, it does look like the varnish is, maybe the roller that was being adjusted was, you could just see this kind of thickness of the varnish, where it just looks like it was applied very, very poorly. What I would describe it as, it looks like it has a pattern from a worn roller, neoprene roller. So again, it's hard to see in the video, but if you look at it with an angle, you can definitely see that there's some issues with your varnish, whoever's printing your labels. Okay. So again, I'm keeping this chipboard underneath it just to help insulate the label. And it looks like, in this case, if I just keep the guide, the bottom guide, in place, I can just simply move this top one over, and I think that will pretty much put us in where we need to be. Okay. It looks, you can always come to the front of the machine and just try to eye it. You can almost pre-feed a label down too and see where it is in relation to the rollers. And it looks like that's pretty much in the center, so I think that's actually going to be quite good. You can back that up a little bit. And again, if you were to remember, if we put in mode number 2, it's not going to feed a label because it's looking to hit this registration switch. So again, let me take that out, put it in mode number 1. You can see a label goes on there really nice and quick. And if you think that the label is a little bit on the low side, again, you gave yourself a little bit of clearance to adjust for that. So we can move that down. If I use that same container, you can see I moved that label up. And you can see on our overlap, we got really, really good, the edges are lining up really nice. So that means that these guides are nice and true, that they're parallel to the label feeding when it hits the glue roller. If we were canted a couple degrees over, you would probably see these edges not line up as nicely. So that's something to be aware of. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and get myself situated here, and I'll just label a couple containers here just so you can get a sense of how to operate the machine. Now, some people will try to do one hand. I don't recommend that in this case because unless you become very, very practiced with the machine. It's generally very, very difficult. Generally, you'll be off. And in this case, we do have to use our left hand to keep the product up against this guide. So we only have one guide. So I recommend two hands. You just present it to the rollers. And I'm just going to slow it down here. You can see it will start wanting to grab. And then I just push a little bit. And the machine will take care of the rest. It will kind of suck in the product and put it into position. And you can see that looks really good. Clean edges. Really, really straightforward. So two hands, present it to the rollers, push in just slightly, and the machine will do the rest. Again, I'm using my right hand to press up slightly, just to make sure it's up against that guide. And it works really, really straightforward. Now, one of the issues that some people, when they first get the machine, what they'll do is they'll jam the product in. You don't need to do that. You don't need to go like that. It's just not necessary. Let the machine do most of the work for you. So just kind of a light touch. You might be a little hesitant at first, but if you just press slightly, you'll see it sucks it in and puts that label on really nicely. And as you go a little bit faster, you see that label goes on in about a second. So as fast as you can insert and pull out. Really, that's the limitation of how quickly you could go. With these labels, you could probably average comfortably about 20 to 24 per minute. And you can see. This does a really nice job. And again, it's adjusting for the pattern. So that's our trailing edge. You can see good fiber tear there, about 1/2 inch. And then on this label, we got about 2.5 inches or 2 inches on the leading edge. And again, we have a good PSA pattern here. And you can see it always remains tacky. So generally, if you were going to relabel, ideally you would have paper to cover the adhesive. Oops, I put it in mode 2. Put it in mode 1, and that label goes on really nicely. So we ran these containers. You can see the changeover was fairly straightforward because you really almost have the same label panel area. You do get to avoid adjusting these rollers, which is very, very nice. Now, some things that we should go over as far as maintenance of the machine. Again, the single most important thing is to keep the rollers nice and clean. So you want to make sure that the white rollers, the aluminum collars, and this label feed plate are nice and clean. You want to make sure that there's no mineral oil on them from the adhesive melting. And if you get a misfeed, you want to make sure that you don't get any residual glue on this plate. So if you do, you want to make sure that you clean that very nicely. And that might happen, let me see if I could, you get a partial feed, let's say, like that. And ideally, you would pull that label forward. But if somebody was to pull that back, you would get adhesive on the plate here. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is just go and feed it forward. If you get partial, you could, here's your glue pattern right there. You'll never get a good representation on the leading edge because you're not pulling it out fast enough. So that's a little bit longer than what you would see, but it is a good way of when you do pull a label by hand that you could check your pattern, your stripes of glue, and make sure that they're nice, the adhesive color is nice and clean, and that you're not missing any stripes. If you're missing any stripes, that generally means that the glue tank is fouled with some paper, and they get caught between the ductor roller. And if that's the case, then you should probably give us a call, and we could go through cleaning the main glue roller. But going back to what I was saying is, if you would pull back, you might get a little bit of adhesive on that plate, and that could interfere with the path of the label. So you want to take your rag again, and then just clean it. It's a little bit of a tight spot there, but you can get access to it, and you can just clean it. And that just allows the labels to go through the machine without any interference from the glue. So that's one of the important aspects, or probably the single most important thing about operating an Advent, is to keep everything as clean as possible. Then obviously you want to check your glue pot to make sure that your glue level's high. If your glue level drops too low, usually about an inch down from the top of the cover, then you're going to get an incomplete pattern. So generally what happens is you don't get glue on the trailing edge of the label, and generally the label might pop off because you're only getting glue on the leading edge. So do get into the habit of checking your glue your glue pot, your glue level. As you're using the machine, you'll get a good sense that like every 1,000 labels, you might have to put a half a pound of glue in the machine. So just take note of that. That's really one of the more important issues of the machine, is to check your glue. Then from there, in the manual, it describes oiling the machine. The machine comes with a zoom spout oiler, and wherever there's a rotating shaft, there's an oil point. And generally you want to add a drop of oil, maybe about once a week. It kind of depends on how often you're using the machine. But again, on every shaft there's an oil port. And this would be a good time to take the cover off the machine, because we could go through those oil points. Again, it's an aluminum cover that generally just sits on with gravity. It's not locked in except for this knob. And this knob has 2 set screws on it. So you just want to make sure you loosen them. And it slides off that shaft. So let me move this out of the way. And by doing that, you can lift up. And you want to lift up from the rear of the machine. By lifting up and tilting forward, you could clear that shaft. The cover weighs about 15 pounds, so you just want to put it off to the side. And once you've done that, you have access to the machine. And again, we have these oil points, these 2 on the top. And then we have an oil cup here. And you want to keep that topped off. That supplies oil to the main glue roller shaft. And this probably gets the most wear and tear. So you want to keep that nice oil, because one of the key issues of longevity is to keep these oil-like bushings well oiled. They're impregnated with oil, but you want to keep them a good supply to them. You don't want to let them go dry. From there, of course, we have our registration switch. And this registration switch is slotted, so you can actually move it forward and backwards if you have other size containers. Generally, when you're running a 5-gallon pail, you might have to move this switch a lot further back. So you can move it sideways, or in and out, and then forward and backwards. There's 2 screws here, and that allows you to move it towards the front and towards the rear. We have other videos that you can look at, that you can see the positioning for a 5-gallon tapered pail, but generally this registration switch would have to be located about right here. We have a glue cam here. This glue clamp, by loosening up this screw right here, socket head screw, you can adjust this cam. And what this cam has is a ductor roller. And that creates a pinch point between the main glue roller and the ductor roller, which allows you to adjust the thickness of the glue. Again, it's generally a very, very small adjustment when you loosen it, and it just allows you to thin up your glue or thicken your glue, depending on your what type of labels you're using and what type of product. We have the micro switch here. This is what allows, this is a dry contact, and as you can see, when this lever gets activated, there's a flat here on this stainless steel shaft collar, and as it pivots down, it presses down on the switch. You can hear it click. And that sends a signal which activates this electromagnetic clutch. And based on the dwell adjustment, this timer adjustment, these black tires will spin for a certain amount of time. Okay, so there's your kind of principle of operation there. We have our electronics here. They're all solid state, really nothing you have to worry about. And then on the opposite, we have our Leeson sealed motor here. Again, it's a really high quality motor, something you don't have to worry about. And then behind that, you will see the thermostat. And right now we have it set for about 300 degrees Fahrenheit. And that seems to be a good temperature for this glue that we're using. We don't have much experience with it, but from our limited testing, 300 degrees looks pretty good. Let's see here. Oh, just to let you know, if you were to get an infrared thermostat, even though when you aim it to the middle of the glue, you'll probably see about 270 degrees, 280 degrees, just because the glue itself is a little bit of a heat sink there. And then on this side, we have our chain drive, which drives the rollers. But we have this drive belt right here. We have two belts. We have a timing belt and a drive belt. And we use a drive belt here because if the glue is not at operating temperature, this V-belt is designed to slip. And by slipping, it prevents any damage to these aluminum bearing blocks. So what might happen over time, especially if you have people that like to turn on the machine before it's at operating temperature, this belt might break down. So that is something that in 4 or 5 years you may have to replace. The same thing with the timing belt. It is a neoprene belt that you might want to have to replace after 4 or 5 years. The label feed tires, generally, they'll be good for 1 to 2 years. It just depends on your usage and how well or how good you are about cleaning those tires. So in reference to pointing that out, some of the wearable items, the 5 things I generally recommend keeping spares of are a drive belt, a timing belt, 5 label feed tires, this cherry micro switch right here, this dry contact, because it does have a rated life. Some of them will last for 10 years, some of them maybe 5 years, just depending on your usage. And then we have a bimetallic thermostat, which again is using points to open and close. And what happens is when the bimetallic thermostat goes out, the machine will go into open, where current is always flowing to the heater plate, and it will melt the glue about 400 to 500 degrees. So generally, if you see a la smoking, and then you check your glue and it's at 400 or 500 degrees, that usually means that the thermostat has gone out. All right. And just to kind of finish reviewing the interior of the machine, I'm just going to show you one of the nice little features of the machine. So I'm going to go ahead and take this cover off. I'm taking off this cover, I'm going to take off this plate. Now this is hot right now, so you want to use something to protect yourself. Put this off to the side here. And by removing that, you can see we have access to the glue pot. You can see the glue level's a little bit on the low side. So again, when you receive this machine, definitely put some glue in there. And with your glue, I think you might have to take off those covers to add a, you had glue in a big bag, so you would go ahead and drop it in there. But What you will notice is if you get some paper into the glue pot, this is an opportunity to try to fish it out carefully. But what happen over time, 2 or 3 years, you might get little bits of paper into the glue pot. And you can get access to it by lifting up the front of the machine and a kickstand drops down. And with the kickstand down, then you can attach these phenolic handles to these two welded on nuts. And by attaching those handles, you can slide out the glue pot. And before you would do that, you would generally toggle the machine on and off to get the glue to drop down as much as possible. You could also turn the glue cam, close it all the way to take all of the glue off the roller. But once you do that, what that allows you to do is if you do get missing some stripes of glue, is you could go to that ductor roller, and then at that pinch point right down there, you could remove any pieces of paper that might have accumulated. It's generally fairly rare, especially if you run a fairly clean operation, but it does happen, and it's just some preventative maintenance that you should be aware of, or if you're missing some stripes of glue, that's generally where to look. And once you get that all cleaned up, or if you want to put in a new batch of glue, some glues will begin to darken over time, and that's carbon building up in the glue. So sometimes you do have to dump your glue and put a new batch of glue in the machine. So this is how you would do it. And it's fairly straightforward, and once you're ready, just go ahead and move that kickstand down, and then you just lower the machine. Make sure that these feet are on the tray of the machine, or the top part of the cart. And then you're ready. You can go ahead and turn it on. Make sure it turns nice and freely. You don't hear anything unusual. And then you're ready to put the cover back on. Drop that into place. You can put the cover on. Make sure you orient it correctly. And there we go. Of course, and sometimes you might see a little mineral oil again accumulate, so you can just go ahead and clean that. Okay, go ahead and turn it on. Looks good. And go ahead and put the aluminum cover back on. Again, if you want to, those are really the only things you have to worry about. Again, put the front down first. Get that shaft cleared. Then push it down all the way. Make sure it goes down. You can always, sometimes what I do is I lift it up a little bit more, and then I just drop it down, and then you get kind of a good thump there, and that should be ready to go. You would just go ahead and reattach your carriage knob. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is just to finish up this video is I'm just going to set it up for the 1 gallon container, just so you can kind of see that, reinforce that setup. Okay. So in this case, again, it seems like the key adjustment is to keep this guide towards the camera locked into place. And then we just adjust this one guide right here. Okay, our stack's getting a little bit on the small side. Make them a little bit on the tight side. Okay. You can see it's moving. Again, these labels are a little bit on the tricky side, but I'm just going to go ahead, open up this guide here. Might want to move that label down all the way. Move the overhead pressure arm out of the way. Just going to eye it where I think it needs to go. I'm going to adjust the carriage. That looks good. So it's hovering about 1/4 of an inch over the finger bar. I kind of have it eyes, so I'm just going to adjust my guide, product guide. And then I'm going to drop my overhead pressure arm into place. So loosen up the middle arm. You can see we have this huge gap right now. So I'm going to loosen it up. A little bit of a space right there, about 1/8 of an inch. Oops. I'm going to go ahead, back that up a little bit, so there's no pre-feed there. Put it into mode number 2. You might want to check my value. You might have a book that says, okay, your setting's 2.2. I'm going to take my container. Just like that, pretty much in the same place within 1/4 of an inch. A little bit on the high side on this label, so turn it off. And that means that we need to move that container up a little bit. Okay, so it's about 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch. You take that same container, turn it on, mode number 2, insert. And there we go. You can see we moved it down about 1/8. Looks really good, nice and centered. It's absolutely perfect. And you can see there, we had to readjust everything. It took about 5 minutes, and it looks really good. Okay. And then I have one container here. Unlabeled. We'll do our final one. Again, 2 hands. Use your right hand to keep it pressed up against the guide. And that is absolutely perfect. And I do want to point out one of the nice things about your labels is you do have a good 1/4 of an inch from the top and the bottom. That's really ideal when you're dealing with molded plastic containers. You want to have a little bit of extra clearance or wiggle room from these ridges. Just makes adjusting the machine a lot easier and more straightforward. If you're dealing with, like, let's say a 1/16 of an inch clearance, and especially on these molded containers that have a little bit of a wobble to them, your adjustments have to be a lot more critical. So having that little bit of clearance just makes it really, really straightforward. So that is the Advent 205 running these 1-gallon containers in quarts. Again, do check with your label printer about your varnish, because that is a little bit of an issue, unexpected issue. But if there's any questions, we can always be reached at 800-846-7716. And that is it. Have a good day.